All right, it's the best day of the week. It's Friday. We always look forward to this day. Just in general, everybody looks forward to Fridays, but we certainly look forward to it here on the Morning Pit because it means it's time for the Morning Pit Mailbag, where we take all the questions from the Pit fans at Panther-Lair.com and answer as many as we can here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pit. So, no need to waste any time. We actually had so many great questions left over from last week that we're just going to pick up where we left off. I actually didn't even put out a call for new questions this week. I don't know if anyone noticed, but there were a lot of questions left over from last week that I was like, you know what? Those guys went through, put in the time to ask those questions. I'm not going to waste that effort because they came up with some great questions and some stuff that I wanted to answer and talk about. So we're just going to do those questions this week. Don't worry, there's a lot of them. So we get a nice lengthy morning pit for you here today on Friday, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, the Friday edition of the Morning Pit always means that we're doing the mailbag where we take questions from the Pit fans at Panther-Lair.com and answer as many as we can here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pit. We put out the call through the week on the message boards, the Between Fifth and Forbes message board at Panther-Lair.com. We asked for questions for the mailbag. People come through, and you guys definitely did last week. So I actually, like I kind of said, just saved a bunch of leftover questions from last week and decided to use those this week because there were a lot of good questions and I didn't want to leave any behind. So let's jump into it. The Morning Pit Mailbag here, the Friday edition of the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We start off with a question from Zeppy131 says, what kind of NIL deals do 2026 recruits get at Pitt? Do you think any guys are making six figures next year? So in terms of incoming high school guys, my guess, there might be one or two who are getting six figures, but I would guess for the most part, no. But I'm not entirely sure about that. Look, I think, Pitt should have more resources available to spend on the football roster this year with revenue sharing and being able to directly get money from Pitt to the players. And so that should have opened up the pool a little bit, but the priority still is on transfers and has to be on transfers. It's on retaining players, and that's, you got to have your priorities there. Because those are the guys that are going to help you win in 2026. But you also need to bring in those good recruits. You need to restock the ranks. And so I think, some money definitely went there. I can't imagine if they have given out six-figure deals to incoming high school guys that there are many of them. Probably just a handful, if any at all, but everybody's getting something. Lacey22 says Pitt, or Chris, and this is a question that's already kind of been answered, but I do want to address it. Says, Chris, is Pitt going to open next season playing Ole Miss, or was that just a rumor? So it's become pretty clear that that's not going to happen. Pitt's still going to open the season. It looks like they're going to open the season against I guess Bucknell is probably what it'll be. When the Wisconsin game that was previously scheduled for September 19th got canceled, there was some thought of, maybe that opens up the space for the Ole Miss game. But the Ole Miss game was being reported, I want to say back in I forget exactly when it was getting reported that Pitt was going to open the 2026 season against Ole Miss on the road, probably in Oxford. I feel like it was getting reported in August or September. But I think if that was in the works, those plans probably changed with news that the ACC was going to have 9 conference games starting in 2026. And the way it's going to work with this, from all that we can read and all the reporting so far, is that the ACC is going to have 16 teams play 9 conference games, and one team will play 8 conference games. And this will be the way it is every year going forward. Obviously rotating through on who that one team is that only plays 8 conference games. It's ridiculous and it's silly, but that's the only way you can do it if you want to play 9 conference games and you have 17 teams. The numbers just don't work out to have 17 teams all play 9 conference games. So then have an even number. You have 16 teams play 9 conference games and one team will play 8. My assumption with the cancellation of the Wisconsin game, and at one point it was sort of getting framed as, well, they canceled Wisconsin so they could schedule Bucknell. And I don't think that's entirely true. I think they had Bucknell on the books. I think Bucknell was probably already scheduled. We just hadn't gotten a real announcement about it. But I think they canceled Wisconsin because they're probably going to get a 9th ACC game. And so that fills out the schedule. You end up with 10 Power 4 opponents with your 9 conference games and UCF. You've got Miami of Ohio and Bucknell as your two non-Power 4 games, and that's your 2026 schedule. That's kind of how I see it. I don't know if the Ole Miss game was ever close to getting played. I don't know if there was a handshake agreement or whatever it was. Our friends at the Ole Miss 24/7 site, I think definitely had good sources on it, that there was something in the works there, but it didn't come to fruition. And then I have to think the ACC going to 9 conference games probably affected it as much as anything and sort of changed that around. So that's kind of what I see with the schedule, and I don't think that Ole Miss thing, I don't know how far it got, but it's not going to happen. The Skater says, is there realistically a scenario where it gets bad enough during this basketball season that Jeff Capel is let go either during the season or afterwards? Have you heard any rumblings or feelings from inside the athletic department on the lack of progress made during the tenure and what it may take to move on or even save his job? Is there a scenario where it gets bad enough that he's let go? Yeah, probably. I think you're getting pretty far into this now. Still a couple years left on the contract, but every year that goes by, that buyout goes down, and it becomes a little bit cheaper to make a move if that's what you're so inclined to do. And so I think that scenario does exist. I think it would have to be pretty bad, but I mean, certainly it feels like this season is on a course for pretty bad. They'll continue to have opportunities to rebound out of it, but they're 10 games in and they don't look like a type of team that can rebound out of, they can't rebound at all. But they don't look like the type of team that can bounce back and sort of turn this around this season, talent wise or other, organizationally, I guess. I don't think there's anything that would happen during the season. I fail to see the upside in making a move during the season. I'm just not sure what would happen unless you have sort of an untenable personal situation. I don't see the upside in doing it in the middle of the season. Plus, there's a lot of reasons. But after the season, Alan Green and the people in charge at Pitt are going to have to sit down and say, okay, what makes sense for us here? Is there a way to coach and play your way out of this? Or is this pretty much doomed? And if it is doomed, if you feel like it's doomed, how much is it going to cost you to get out of it? And at a certain point, that number of what it'll cost to get out will get low enough that you can justify it. Me, I don't really have a stomach for paying people to go away. I don't really have the stomach for paying people not to work. But at a certain point, if the level of success is low enough, the returns are low enough, then you gotta make a decision. And I think chances are those conversations will be had after this season. What they decide to do, that's above my pay grade. Pitt Fan 247 says, with the frequent complaints about Pat Narduzzi, do you really think in the era of NIL and rev share that another coach could actually get Pitt into a better position year in and year out? It seems like a lot of schools are hiring and firing, and Narduzzi is at least stable and loyal. With limited resources, could anyone else do much better? Saban said Pat does more with less than anyone else, and he didn't have to say that, but he did. Could another coach do better? Probably. Could another coach do worse? Yeah, probably too. I think there's always a possibility you could find someone who recruits better than Pat Narduzzi and his staff do, and I think they recruit pretty well. Some positions better than others, but I think they generally recruit pretty well. But you could probably find someone who could recruit a little bit better. You could probably find someone who could be a little bit better on game day, but you could also find people who recruit worse. You can find people who are worse on game day. This team has made a strength out of defense. You could find someone who comes in and maybe doesn't quite maintain that strength on defense and doesn't improve the offense enough to overturn it. I think, Pitt's got a program built, and I think there is value in that. And having something built, you're always going to have personnel turnover, players change year to year. But in football, I think, there is value in having build a foundation. And I think that's what Pat Narduzzi has done over the last 11 years. He has built a foundation, and I think that's important. You kind of know what you have and know generally what you're going to get. And I think you can feel pretty confident that with Pat Narduzzi, if you can get the right players and get the stars to align, you can have one of those big years. We always talk about what's Pitt's ceiling or what's the ideal cycle. And I think it's a cycle of consistently staying at or above 8 wins. You really don't want to dip below that. I think when you dip below that, that's when you run into trouble. But trying to consistently stay at or above 8 wins and then work toward those seasons, maybe every 3 or 4 years, where everything kind of lines up and you're able to really push through and have that big season. Maybe make a push for the playoffs, compete for the ACC. I think that's the cycle you want to be in, and that's probably the cycle that cycle is probably the ceiling for Pitt. And I think, Pat Narduzzi more or less has them there. I think another coach could probably get them there, but I do think the stability, the loyalty, the foundation are important, and I think Pat Narduzzi's done a good job with those in those areas. All right. Who is this? This is Pitt Hawk 24 says, I've got a handful of questions about football and basketball. Lengthy, probably, so apologies. All right, he's got 5 questions with part 1 and part 2 to the first question. So we'll go question by question here. 1A, Pitt's offense in football, while high scoring, is proven to be streaky under Cade Bell, even with the quarterback change. The biggest issue to the naked eye are in games where Pitt can't run the ball and is forced into 3rd and longs. How much of this streakiness is talent related versus not maximizing the talent that's on the field? And follow up, is there anything Pitt can do schematically or game plan wise to better utilize their personnel, or is it truly a talent size issue in regards to the run game? Well, I think the run game is an important part of it. Look, if there was a single biggest problem for Pitt this season on offense, is that they didn't do well enough on first down. And at some point this offseason, I'll go through and I'll chart every first down and what they gained on every first down and what the result was of that series if they, faced, what kind of third down they faced. I've got a chart of third downs. I mean, it won't surprise you to know that 3rd and 4, they convert pretty well. 3rd and 9, they don't convert as well. You have to, okay, if you want to have a good offense, you need to score touchdowns. If you want to score touchdowns, you need to be able to extend drives. If you want to extend drives, you need to be in third and manageable situations. You'd like to have that offense that hits a bunch of big plays. That's going to be great if you could rip off big chunk plays all the time. But you need, to avoid the streakiness that you're talking about, you need to be in third and manageable situations. And to get in third and manageable situations, you need to get good gains on first down. Now, sometimes you'll get that 2nd and 10 play that picks up 7 yards, and that's great. But you'll have a much better chance of either converting third down or avoiding third down altogether if you can get 4 yards or 5 yards on first down. I mean, this is simple, basic, obvious stuff, right? So the question is, how do you get 4 yards or 5 yards on first down consistently? Running the ball well and using play action off that run. And I don't think play action was really a weapon for Pitt this season because it wasn't much of a threat. There wasn't a big threat of the run game. How can you improve it schematically? I don't know. I'm not smart enough to tell you that. I'm not. You can get different reviews on Pitt's run game. They probably could try some different things in terms of how they design the run game and how they execute it, how they call it. But you also need better offensive linemen. You know what I mean? You need to be able to run block better than Pitt did this year. And there's a question of how committed they are to the run and, how committed Cade Bell is to his running game. But that, when you boil it down to it, how do you get more consistent offensive production out of Pitt or for Pitt? You do better on first down. And I think if you do better on first down, you're going to have more success overall. You're going to get third and manageable. You're going to miss third down altogether. You're going to extend drives, and you'll get into the end zone more. Question 2 from Pitt Hawk 24 says, I think part of the reason fans, myself included, are paranoid about Mason Heinchel entering the transfer portal is it seems like a rarity these days to have a homegrown kid you can develop this early in his career. We've also seen a lot of other freshman players make huge impacts this year. Now, obviously, freshmen and recruits need the talent, and that isn't always their year one. But is Pitt better off in the long run, leaning more on younger talent and recruits and developing them over a couple of seasons to really compete for an ACC title on a relatively consistent basis, or is that not possible in the plug-and-play era of the transfer portal? Is Pitt better off leaning on they're always going to need to be able to recruit well and develop their talents. You know what I mean? Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, Cruz Brookins, Javon McIntyre, Rashad Battle, Jimmy Scott, Ryan Baer, B.J. Williams, Mason Heinchel, and Jakarian Turner, but Kenny Johnson, these are guys who have been around for a long time. These are guys, Braylon Lovelace, these are Sean Fitzsimmons, Francis Brew, these are guys who have been at Pitt. Isaiah Neal, I'm just thinking of guys who contributed this year. Some of the main players, the starters and top reserves, they're guys who have been at Pitt, who've developed under this staff, and they're they're here, they're now, and they're making plays. You know what I mean? They've come into their own, and they've been important players for Pitt over the last couple of seasons. But then you do need that plug and play side of it too. You need Justin Holmes to step in this year. You need who's another good example. I mean, the defensive ends, but you kind of lost some of those guys to injury. But I mean, you're relying on them. The offensive linemen, obviously, Lennon Cooper and Keith Gouvet and Kendall Stanley and Jeff Percy. Cooper being a 2-year guy, and they've had a number of these like multi-year transfers. Tamon Lynham's another one. Nick James is another one. You need a mix of that. I think if you're Pitt, you need a mix of that. You need to have guys that you bring in and develop and build over a couple of years, and then you need those transfers who fill the immediate holes. I don't think for the most part you're not recruiting guys thinking they'll help in their first year. I don't think they recruited Mason Heinschel thinking he'd be a starter for 8 games this season. I don't think they recruited Jakarian Turner. I think they believed Turner could make plays and help them, but I don't think they recruited him to be, the lead rusher as a true freshman. I don't think they recruited Sean Lee thinking he would come in and play as much as he did as a true freshman. For the most part, they're recruiting guys that they expect to be able to develop over the course of a couple of years and build the foundation of the roster with those guys when they're in their second and third and fourth years, and plug in transfers around them. So it's a mix of them. Question number 3 from Pitt Hawk 24. How different does this Pitt basketball team look with Deshaun Jackson starting at center and Cam Corrin being able to play the 4? I mean, very different. Very different. But right now, with Papa Amadou Kanti hurt, you would end up in a situation where you would have Corrin and Jackson both playing the 5, and you wouldn't be relying on Cam Corrin for 38, 39 minutes a night, which is a real problem right now. It's going to be a problem down the road. It's a problem. I think it's a problem to have Cam Corrin on the court for 38 minutes. Just period. Your team should not be in a position where they need Cam Corrin on the court for 38 minutes. I don't think that's a good thing. It implies negative outcomes. But then also down the road, you're going to wear him down if you have to keep playing him 38, 39 minutes, and they just don't have any other option. They brought in Kieran Mullen for like 45 seconds the other night, Sunday night. Papa Amadou Kanti being out has limited their depth at center. If they had Deshaun Jackson, they could play Corrin they could play Jackson, and they could play Corrin with him, and then, still work out your rotations at the 1, 2, 3, and 4, but at least you wouldn't be running your center into the ground, which is what they're doing with Corrin right now. Now, would they have beaten Quinnipiac with Deshaun Jackson? Would they have beaten Hofstra with Deshaun Jackson? Would they have beaten UCF or West Virginia or Texas A&M with Deshaun Jackson? I can't sit here and sincerely tell you I believe that they would have, but if nothing else, you just wouldn't be running Cam Corrin into the ground. And that's maybe the best I could say. Question number 4. A lot of negativity in general around Pitt basketball and Jeff Capel, which is absolutely fair, but is there anything the team and Capel are doing particularly well this year that should get us excited about next year with a promising incoming class? I mean, man, I can't really think that far ahead. I mean, like, Omari Witherspoon looks promising. He looks lost at times, but he looks promising. He's exciting. I think, as an in-season storyline, Barry Dunning Jr.'s turnaround after his rough start to the year, and what he's sort of grown into and become over the last 8 games or 6 games or whatever it's been, that's a positive. But on the whole, it's hard for me to look ahead and say, like, here's something to be excited about for next year other than maybe Omari Witherspoon. And final one, it says, I'm relatively new to the message boards. I've seen a lot of posts and comments that are interesting to say the least. What's a Pitt narrative from us fans that needs to die but just refuses to? And there's a reply from Pat Mac 59. It says, I'm not Chris, but my answer to your question is this idea of Pitt being a cursed program or pitting. And it goes on and kind of lays out why that's a bad. Actually, I'll read the rest of Pat Mac 59's response to the question about a myth that needs to die. It Says every team at Pitt's level in college football occasionally blows games they should win or blows big leads. SMU lost to Cal with an ACC championship game bid on the line a week after Cal lost to Stanford and fired its head coach. Louisville should have been in the driver's seat to make the ACC championship game but blew multiple winnable games. It's football. Unless your team is loaded from top to bottom, you're going to have bad games every once in a while. It even happens in the NFL. It's as if some people on here either only watch Pitt or watch Pitt and teams in the top 10. Yeah, so pitting is something that I've complained about for a while. This concept of pitting, this idea that Pitt, they always blow it in this situation. Well, no, they're not talented enough to be a consistent 12-0 team. And so inevitably they're going to lose games at some point, and it's going to be oftentimes because of something dumb. And it doesn't, like the whole pitting idea, stretches back to Clemsoning. Clemsoning was the original one. And that one was one that actually meant something, where you have a lot on the line and you blow an otherwise winnable game. I think that's generally what's considered Clemsoning. Pitting, people just use it anytime Pitt just blows a game. But there's not something unique or special about that. It's like in The Wire when they say there's special dead. There's no special dead. It's just dead. There's nothing about pitting or special kind of losing. You just lose games. That's all it really boils down to. You just sometimes you lose games, and it's not some special or unique thing. It doesn't mean you're cursed or anything like that. There's times where you scratch your head and you say, God, how does this program find ways to lose games like this? But in the end, it's because their talent level is such that sometimes you're just not going to be good enough or have the depth to win all the time, and you're going to blow opportunities. All right, Marlon Barnes Truther says, Chris, what was your favorite moment of the season? Personally, it was the Lovelace pick 6. Yeah, I think, we did the play of the year. I put the Braylon Lovelace pick 6 at the top. That was a big one. Kenny Johnson's punt return at Syracuse right before the end of the half, right before the end of the first half. Huge play, great play, game-changing play, game-saving play. Mason Heintzel's circus touchdown throw to Desmond Reed, that was a big one. I would have to put that one pretty high on the list, but I mean, I'm not sure you could really find something bigger than Braylon Lovelace's pick 6. I mean, it was the play of the game in the biggest win of the season, and Pitt's best win of the season. One of their better wins in the past few years. Maybe the best win they've had since the Sun Bowl in 2022. Maybe the best win they've had since the ACC championship game in 2021. I mean, that was a really good win on the road against a ranked conference opponent who had everything to play for. And that was the play that changed the game. That or maybe Jakiri Turner's breakaway touchdown run that ultimately sealed it. But that's a 14-point swing. The Lovelace pick 6 is a 14-point swing in a 14-point game. 1 + 1 = 2 here, folks. And in that case, I think that was the play of the season. It was exciting and fun to watch. I mean, Rasheem Biles' 75-yard pick 6 was a pretty exciting, fun play to watch, but it ultimately was in a loss. And, I mean, Lovelace went 100 yards. So we're going to give him the credit there. All right, great questions. Thanks, everybody, who contributed them. And, apologize for waiting a week to get to them, but those were all really good questions, so we wanted to make sure we did get to them. Thanks to everybody who sent those questions in. We'll take more questions next week for the mailbag. And otherwise, it's been a great week. It's been a lot of fun, talking about Pitt sports here on the Morning Pitt and on the live show on Wednesday night. So thanks everybody who tuned in this week. I hope you've had a great week. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the Pitt basketball game tomorrow. And we'll catch up with you on Monday morning for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.